Hello everyone, Mixed Concepts here. So if you've clicked on this video based on the title, yes, it may say that MI New York were mathematical fraud champions. However, they do deserve to win, and I'll admit it, they did. They caught form right on time because they only won 1 out of 7 games. And then they proceeded to win 5 of their last 6 games, including 3 in a row in the playoffs, and got the trophy and won the 2025 Major League Cricket tournament. So credit to them. They deserved it because they got form at the right time and they beat the top 3 teams who were consistent throughout the group phase, but they lost their playoff game. They beat San Francisco Unicorns in the eliminator, then they beat Texas Super Kings in the challenger, and then they beat Washington Freedom in the championship game or the final. So they couldn't beat any of these 3 teams in the group phase. But when it came to the playoffs, they stepped up big and they won. Credit to them, because that's all I can say. Now, why did I even title this as they are mathematically a fraud champion? It's because despite them winning the tournament, they played 13 games and they only won 6, lost 7. That's less than 50% of the games they've won. They had a sub 500 record. If you are talking with an American in American sports, that's a sub 500 record. And teams that usually have a sub 500 record in American sports, they don't even make the playoffs. And even if they do, they don't get it very far. But MI New York, they had a 30% win percentage in the group phase. So they just had a .300 record when you think about it from that perspective in the group phase. But they won the last 3 games in the playoffs and they made it through to become champions. Now, what I mean by that, why they being champions is remarkable, even though it's quote unquote fraudulent, is because when we look at some of the major American team sports leagues, whether it be the MLB, NHL, NBA, or the NFL, there are teams, the worst teams that have made the postseason or the playoffs, with poor winning percentages that were even below 50%. But they didn't go on to win that tournament. So, for example, in the NFL, the teams with the worst record that did go on to make the playoffs, they had a record of 7-9. They won 7 and lost 9 out of 16 games they played. But the crazy thing is, that percentage is actually higher than New York and then MI New York achieved in the group phase. Because that's nearly 50%. And this was achieved by 3 teams throughout NFL history. The Cincinnati Bengals did it, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Washington Commanders. Or at the time they were called the Washington Redskins, but now they're the Washington Commanders. Yeah, they all had a 7-9 record in 16 games. They won 7 games, lost 9 games. But none of them went on to win the Super Bowl. They didn't win the final. So even in NFL playoffs, they're all one-off games. So they could have caught fire like MI New York did and go on to win. But they didn't. They lost in the playoffs. And then the NBA, the worst team record-wise that did make the postseason or the playoffs was the Baltimore Bullets back in the 1950s when the NBA was in its early stages. And they had a record of 1655. That or 1654, whatever it was, based on the research, it was actually a worse winning percentage throughout the group stage, or the regular season as it's called, compared to MI New York. When you look at it percentage wise, they had like a 23 win percentage, which is really bad, but they still made the playoffs. New York had a 30% win percentage. MI New York had a 30% win percentage. But the Baltimore Bullets, as they were called back then, now Baltimore technically doesn't even have a team. Or they might, based because they're Washington, D.C. maybe. Well, if that's the case, then they're now called the Washington Wizards. But yeah, they didn't go on to win in the playoffs. I think they won the first round, but they lost in the second round of the playoffs. So that's it. Their postseason came to an end as well. And in the NBA playoffs, they unlike the MLC, they're usually series. Back in the 50s, maybe the NBA was a bit different, but the finals also wasn't a one-off game. I think it was at least a three-game or even a five-game series. So you had to win multiple games to prove that you deserve to be the champion in the finals. And I think they didn't even get to the finals of Baltimore Bullets. They lost in a series. I think that was a five-game series, but yeah, they had to lose three to prove that they were not that great, and they did. Or in other words, the other team had to win three to prove that they deserve to advance to the next phase. And then the NHL. Now, the NHL is a bit interesting because draws do account for the record. And the worst team record wise that didn't make the playoffs was the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 1987 or 88 season, when they won just 21 games, had 49 losses, and 10 ties or draws. Well, they played 80 games and only won 21, so it was barely above a 25% win percentage, which is actually worse than MI New York's when you think about it. But if you do exclude the draws, then 21 out of 70 is it's the same as 3 over 10, just like MI New York. But unlike MI New York, Toronto Maple Leafs, they did not even get past the first round. They put up a good fight in a 7-game series. They won 2, but they lost 4. You have to win 4 out of 7 if you want to advance to the next round, and they couldn't. They tried, though, and Toronto in the Stanley Cup playoffs, as it's called in National Hockey League, but it wasn't to be for them. And then in the MLB, a team usually plays 162 games in the MLB. So if a team only wins 30% of their games, that's what? If 54 is 33.3%, and no team makes it with just a 33.3% win percentage. In fact, the team with the quote-unquote worst record was the Kansas City Royals back in the 1980s, when they only won 50 out of 103 games. So they actually had a sub 500 record that made the playoffs. But they still made it because it was actually a shortened season and they got a bit lucky. They didn't go on to win the tournament. They didn't go on to win the World Series, as it's called in Major League Baseball. But they got close. Not really that close, but they didn't make it to the playoffs. And then the team that actually had the quote-unquote worst record to make the playoffs in a full season were the San Diego Padres, recently as well. It was in the 2000s. They actually had an 82-80 record. Now, they're considered the worst team to make the playoffs based on a regular season record, or the group stage record. And they won more games than they lost. They actually had an over 50% win percentage. And even they are considered the worst team in a full regular season to make the playoffs in Major League Baseball. That just shows that you need to be really good if you want to make the playoffs. Because it usually, in MLB, only 8 teams make the playoffs, even though there are 30 teams in total. Yeah, 6 divisions, the top 6. So each division, one team is guaranteed to make it through. So it's the top team from each division, and then there's the 2 wildcard entries. I think it's basically whoever has the best record, who didn't win the division, they make it through. So that's how 8 teams make it into the MLB playoffs. What's crazy as well is that the team with the best record that did not even make it to the playoffs was the Chicago Cubs or the LA Dodgers. They won 104 games out of 150 something, and they still couldn't make it. They had over 60%, 66% win percentage to be precise. And they still couldn't make the playoffs in the MLB. Yeah, that was rough. So based on some of the American team sports leagues, it's crazy to think how MI New York went on to win the tournament. Yeah, they only had to win 3 games in a row compared to all the other leagues where you have to win quite a few games. Although in the NFL, if you only win 4 games in a row in the playoffs, I think you still go on to win. So NFL does have the best chance. I think the 3 teams that got a 7-9 record, they had the best chance to try and prove what MI New York did, but all of them failed. But MI New York, they were a talented team, so the record did not really reflect how they played through the group phase. I mean, they easily could have won 3 games against Texas, San Francisco, and Seattle, where they lost 3 games that they should have won, or they probably could have, but probably should have. They could have got a record of 6-4 in their 10 games, and in that case, I would not even be making all these comparisons because you won 6 out of 10 games, and then you won 3 in a row, so you would have had a record of 9-4 through 13 games, and then at that point, that's pretty much well deserved. Yeah, I'm not saying that MI New York did not deserve it. I'm just saying how they mathematically defied the odds to go on to win the MLC despite having a losing record, even though they won the last 3 games in the playoffs and went on to win the tournament. And that just shows how remarkable the playoff system is in the MLC. I mean, it is up for debate should each playoff games actually be a playoff series, like it's the best of 3, so the team that's better because they win 2 out of 3 win, or you just keep it as a 1 game and then it's really a one-off game, anything can happen. But at the same time, why I say MI New York also deserved it, because when you think about it, if they were truly just a lucky team that made it to the playoffs, they had to play 3 games in a row against 3 top teams, and they're all one-off games. So at some point, their luck should have ran out. Whether it could have just ran out against San Francisco because they almost lost the game from a winning position they were in at one point, but they got saved at the end by Trent Bolt with his 2 6s, and then they managed to go on and win. But then against Texas as well, when Monang Patel got out, it was not a very ideal situation for them. Luckily, Poran and Pollard were there to save the day. But sometimes, what if they both got out? What if you look in the flip side? Then Texas probably would have gone on to win. And then New York would not even be in the final. And then against Washington Freedom, they should have scored 200 considering the start they had and the platform they set for the last 5 overs, but they lost a few wickets, and they could only get to 180. And even though they got 2 wickets in the first over, the counterattack from Rachin Ravindra and Jack Edwards brought Washington Freedom way ahead of the rate, and it seemed like they were going to cruise to victory. But then New York, they put on the pressure, and they got wickets at the right time, and ultimately it came down to 12 in the last over. It was a 50-50 game, and Rushil Ugarkar, the youngster who had a horrid day against Texas when he was balling the last over, gave 5 wides, 3 sixes. It was not a good day for him there. But he redeemed himself extremely well in the final. When it mattered the most, he balled his best over. He only gave 6 runs against Glenn Maxwell and Glenn Phillips. Yeah, the last ball he was hit for 4 by August Pinar, but by then the game was over. But the point is, New York really could have lost all 3 games, but they went on to win. Did they have a bit of luck? Sure. But at the same time, they also did deserve it, because luck only takes you so far. Yeah, you could say, and one can argue, that they were lucky because LA Knight Riders and Seattle Orcas were just even worse. That, 3 wins, they had 3 wins. Even the Orcas had 3 wins, but all 3 wins came courtesy of Hetmeyer and his one-man show effort. And then when he got out, Seattle couldn't win. And LA Knight Riders, though, as I said last video, they're kind of a disgrace. They only won 2 games, and they were just no good as a team. They're the only team in MLC history to not even made the playoffs or the postseason. In this 6-team tournament, and 4 teams make the playoffs. I mean, New York made the playoffs only winning 3 games out of 10. And they proved that once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. And they went on to win the tournament altogether over the likes of Texas Super Kings, San Francisco Unicorns, and the Washington Freedom. So, congratulations to MI New York for winning MLC 2025. It was a great tournament from start to finish. There were quite a few interesting games. And I'm also really glad that the postseason did occur. I did mention in my previous video that there were floods in Texas, and I wasn't sure if any of the games would have been played. If Washington Freedom did go on to win based on all washouts, then it would have been a bit of a scummier way. I would say it would have been an even scummier way than the way MI New York won, because they won without even playing. Yeah, they won 8 out of 10 games, so you could have said well deserved, but still, that would not feel like the ideal way to win. You got to play the final and win the tournament, and that's what MI New York did. They played the final and won, so they are the deserved winners, in my opinion. Well, I also wanted to give a quick mention to a couple of test matches that occurred that came to an end, whether it be the India England test match at Lords. That was a wonderful game as a neutral fan. Yeah, feel a bit for Siraj and Bumrah. Their resistance went in vain, and so did Jadeja's resistance. They almost chased down the target against England. And then the West Indies got all off at 27. They nearly created a new record, which no team wants to hold, which would have been the lowest test innings score by a team in test match cricket history. So the West Indies managed to avoid that, but they are the second lowest. And that still is not at all a record you want to be in. So Australia just proved they're too good to the West Indies there. I mean, 27 all out is just ridiculous. So that'll be it for this video. Thank you for watching this video. If you're watching it till this point, you are really awesome, because I just went on rambling and mentioned so many leagues and so many records and whatnot and what sort. So if you've really watched it till here, thank you so much. If you did like this entire video, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. And until the next video, bye.